History remembers her as a monster, a woman who allegedly turned human suffering into household decor. To the prisoners of Buchenwald, she was the witch, a figure of pure terror who rode through the camp with a whip in her hand. Yet, beyond the gruesome legends of lampshades and human skin lies a far more unsettling reality. She was not just a symbol of depravity, she was a wife, a mother, and a cog in a machine that defied morality. Was she truly the sadist the world demanded, or a convenient scapegoat for a nation desperate to hide its own complicity? Origins of the Witch of Buchenwald. Margarete Ilse Köhler was born in 1906 into the modest, working-class landscape of Dresden, Germany. Her early life was defined by the mundane, the rhythm of secretarial school, the hum of post-war inflation, and the struggle of a lower middle-class family trying to maintain stability in a nation splintered by the collapse of the German Empire. There was nothing in her background as a clerk that hinted at the psychological abyss she would eventually inhabit. Yet, the chaos of the Weimar Republic acted as a crucible. By 1932, she had fully committed to the siren call of the Nazi Party, a move that shifted her trajectory from the dull normalcy of a clerical office to the lethal inner circles of the rising SS. The pivot point of her life arrived in 1934, when she crossed paths with Karl Otto Koch. He was everything the era rewarded. A decorated, aggressive World War I veteran who had spent his post-war years failing at civilian life, punctuated by a prison stint for embezzlement and forgery. In the ruthless hierarchy of the SS, his lack of moral compass was not a liability, it was a career asset. Their union was not merely a marriage, it was a bureaucratic alliance sanctioned by the SS Office of Racial and Settlement Affairs, which meticulously scrubbed their lineages to ensure they met the regime's standards of Aryan purity. They were married in 1937 at Sachsenhausen, an event that formally integrated Ilse into the violent machinery of the concentration camp system. When Karl Otto was ordered to establish Buchenwald near Weimar in July 1937, the pair did not merely arrive as administrators. They built a kingdom. The SS constructed a luxurious three-story villa directly on the camp perimeter for the Koch family. It was a domestic space placed within an industrial graveyard. From this vantage point, Ilse wielded a form of power that was terrifying, specifically because it was unofficial. She held no rank, yet she commanded the fear of every prisoner and guard. She was the Kommandeuse of Buchenwald, a title that signaled her position as the undisputed mistress of a landscape defined by starvation and death. Her daily routine was a performance of calculated sadism. She became a fixture of the campgrounds, riding through the compound on horseback to hunt for targets. When she spotted an inmate working shirtless, she would close the distance, using a horsewhip or riding crop to lash out at the emaciated men. To ensure she could indulge in her equestrian pursuits regardless of the weather, Karl Otto ordered the construction of a massive indoor riding arena. The price of this vanity project was absolute. The facility cost over 250,000 Reichsmarks and claimed the lives of 30 prisoners, worked to death to satisfy her desire for a place to watch her own reflection in the mirrors. The camp zoo was another testament to her warped sense of leisure. Built just outside the perimeter for the Koch family's entertainment, it housed bears, wolves, and monkeys. It functioned as a grotesque contrast to the suffering mere yards away, and for Karl Otto, it served a darker purpose. Occasionally, he would throw prisoners into the bear den to be torn apart while he and his guests watched. Ilse would walk the grounds in provocative clothing, skin exposed to the biting air, and if a prisoner so much as lifted his gaze, the punishment was swift and brutal. She delighted in forcing inmates into hours-long naked roll calls in the freezing cold, using the vulnerability of the starving men as a source of amusement. By 1941, the Kochs had become the undisputed architects of Buchenwald's terror. Prisoners whispered her name with a primal dread, calling her the Witch of Buchenwald, the Queen, or the Beast. She had successfully turned a death camp into a personal stage for her own impulses. However, the architecture of their power was inherently unstable. Their downfall did not originate from the international community or the moral outrage of the world, but from the internal rot of the Nazi state itself. Karl Otto had grown emboldened by his position, viewing the camp not just as a site of extermination, but as a personal piggy bank. He embezzled massive sums of money and stole gold fillings from the mouths of corpses, hoarding a fortune while the camp starved. His greed finally triggered the attention of SS Judge Konrad Morgan, a man tasked with cleaning up the corruption that threatened the reputation of the SS. In August 1943, the Gestapo arrived at the villa. The charges were not for the thousands of lives they had shattered, but for the theft of over 200,000 Reichsmarks and the execution of key witnesses who might have testified against them. The dream of the Koch dynasty had collided with the cold, bureaucratic reality of their own organization, signaling the beginning of the end for the couple who had treated human suffering as a private enterprise. The infamous human skin allegations, the liberation of Buchenwald in April 1945, brought the world face to face with the industrial scale of Nazi genocide. But amidst the piles of corpses and the emaciated survivors, one particular narrative emerged that would eclipse almost everything else. It was the story of the lady of the house, the woman who supposedly looked at human beings not as souls, but as raw materials for home decor. Tales began to circulate immediately among the survivors and the liberating American troops. Ilse Koch, it was claimed, had developed a horrifying hobby. She would ride through the camp, her eyes scanning the shirtless, suffering men for a specific kind of beauty, artistic or intricate tattoos. Those prisoners selected by her gaze would soon vanish, and within weeks their skin would reappear in the Koch villa, transformed into lampshades, book covers, album bindings, and even a pair of gloves. This legend was not born in a vacuum. It was rooted in the very real, very sickening activities of the camp's pathology department. Under the direction of SS Dr. Erich Wagner, the camp did indeed conduct systematic research into tattooing, and there is no dispute that human skin was tanned and processed there for pseudoscientific dissertations on criminality. Stefan Heymann, a former political prisoner, famously noted that while other SS officers also took an interest in these gruesome trophies, Ilse Koch was uniquely proud of owning a lady's handbag fashioned from human remains. These stories provided a visceral, tangible focal point for a world struggling to comprehend the abstract, bureaucratic horrors of the Holocaust. It was easier to process the image of a cruel woman with a skin lampshade than it was to grasp the sheer, cold-blooded efficiency of the gas chambers. Yet, as the legal proceedings began, the wall between horrific reality and sensationalist folklore began to fracture. Prosecutors at the trials struggled to bridge the gap between the known activities of the pathology department and the specific personal culpability of Ilse Koch. They were forced to rely on the testimonies of two former inmates whose accounts were savaged during cross-examination, revealing striking chronological inconsistencies that threatened to undermine the entire case. The legal reality was messy. General Lucius D. Clay, the American military governor, would later dismiss these allegations entirely, arguing that Ilse had been removed from the commandant's villa long before the Americans arrived to discover these items. In his view, the evidence simply did not exist to link her directly to the artifacts, and he famously remarked that the infamous lampshades were likely nothing more than goat skin. The scientific community spent the next several decades oscillating between horror and skepticism. In the 1990s, DNA testing on one of the purported Buchenwald lampshades suggested human origin, only for a secondary analysis to debunk it, identifying the material as cowhide and attributing the initial results to contamination. It seemed as though the truth might forever remain in the realm of myth. However, the pendulum swung back in 2023. A study led by criminal biologist Mark Benecca examined a surviving desk lampshade linked to the camp and concluded that it was indeed made from human skin. This discovery underscored the enduring, jagged nature of the forensic debate. It was not a simple case of true or false, but a complex intersection of genuine atrocity and the post-war need for a singular monstrous villain. The irony of this historical legacy is that these sensational accusations became the primary foundation of her notoriety. The world did not want to hear about the subtle, institutionalized cruelty of the Nazi state. They wanted the image of the Witch of Buchenwald. By focusing on the skin artifacts, the public imagination found a convenient shorthand for Nazi depravity. It transformed a woman who was a willing, active participant in a system of mass murder into a caricature of Gothic horror. This obsession with the macabre effectively overshadowed her actual, documented crimes: the systemic beatings, the incitement to murder, and the administrative support she provided to a machine of annihilation. Whether or not she personally ordered every item in the villa, the myth of the monster served its purpose, turning Ilse Koch into the definitive, terrifying symbol of a regime that had stripped away the last remnants of human dignity. The controversial 1947 Allied Military Tribunal. The 1947 Allied Military Tribunal at Dachau was never going to be a quiet, legal proceeding. When the U.S. military brought 31 former Buchenwald officials to trial, the world's attention narrowed down to one person in the dock: Ilse Koch. As the only female defendant, she became the singular focus of an international media frenzy. Journalists and photographers were desperate for the details of her atrocities, but they were equally obsessed with the spectacle of a woman who had broken the most fundamental taboos of her gender. The press coverage was relentlessly aggressive, painting her not merely as a war criminal, but as a sadistic pervert of massive proportions. This hypersexualized narrative turned her into a monster in the public eye, a convenient villain whose supposed depravity and violation of traditional gender norms were far more headline-worthy than the cold, bureaucratic mechanics of the state-sponsored genocide she helped facilitate. Chief Prosecutor William Denson faced a daunting challenge. He had to convince a tribunal to hand down a severe sentence when concrete, forensic evidence for specific murders was notoriously thin. His solution was a landmark application of the common design legal theory. This doctrine allowed the prosecution to bypass the need for a smoking gun, a specific, witnessed act of killing, by arguing that the camp itself was a machine of mass murder. Under this framework, any individual who knowingly and actively supported the camp's daily operations shared collective criminal responsibility for the atrocities that occurred within its gates. Denson meticulously presented evidence showing that Koch regularly reported inmates for minor, often trivial infractions, fully aware that her denunciations would inevitably lead to brutal, fatal punishments. By proving her active participation in the camp's culture of terror, the common design theory effectively locked the cage around her. Throughout the trial, Koch adopted a strategy of calculated denial. She cast herself as a completely detached housewife and mother, a woman who had been confined to the domestic sphere and was entirely ignorant of the administrative brutality occurring just outside her villa walls. She claimed she had no official authority and no connection to the killings. It was a performance of vulnerable, innocent femininity, but it stood in stark contrast to the testimonies of former inmates who had seen her patrol the grounds. These survivors provided a vivid, harrowing counter-narrative, describing her not as a passive observer, but as an active, feared participant who weaponized her status to destroy lives. The image of the innocent housewife disintegrated as the evidence of her daily presence and her role in the camp's terror became clear. Behind the scenes of this legal drama, a bizarre and dark reality was unfolding. While she sat in isolation at the Dachau detention facility, Koch conceived a child. In October 1947, just as the gravity of her situation became undeniable, she gave birth to her son, Uwe, in the Landsberg prison hospital. This created a surreal spectacle that captivated the press and the public. Rumors swirled, with some outlets sensationalizing the idea that the father was an American Jewish military translator, a claim designed to heighten the perceived perversity of her life. The reality was more grounded, though no less grim. Historical analysis points to a fellow war crimes internee, Fritz Schäfer, as the father. The birth of a child in the heart of the prison system, while she faced the consequences of her time at Buchenwald, underscored the jarring dissonance of her life. She was a woman who had orchestrated misery for thousands, yet she simultaneously performed the role of a mother, using her pregnancy and maternal status to maintain the persona of a vulnerable, misunderstood figure. On August 14, 1947, the tribunal delivered its verdict, finding her guilty under the common design framework and sentencing her to life imprisonment at Landsberg. It was a moment of judicial victory. Yet the public's obsession with her gender and her life continued to turn her into a symbol, distracting from the systemic nature of the crimes that had occurred at Buchenwald. Cold War politics and legal turbulence. The ink had barely dried on the 1947 life sentence when the post-war order began to collapse under the weight of shifting geopolitics. In 1948, General Lucius D. Clay, the military governor of the American zone, made a decision that would send shockwaves across the globe. He commuted Ilse Koch's life sentence to a mere 4 years. Clay's reasoning was rooted in a cold, procedural assessment. He argued that the prosecution had failed to provide convincing physical evidence to substantiate the horrifying claims about human skin artifacts. To Clay, the legal standard had not been met. To the rest of the world, however, it looked like a betrayal of justice. The public outcry was instantaneous and vicious. Veterans groups, foreign governments, and the media lashed out, accusing the American government of sacrificing moral integrity to buy favor with a German population that needed to be courted in the burgeoning Cold War. The backlash became a domestic crisis for the United States. A U.S. Senate committee launched a formal investigation into the leniency shown to Nazi war criminals, and even President Harry S. Truman found himself forced to address the growing perception that the Americans were going soft on the architects of the Holocaust. The situation was politically radioactive. The U.S. military authorities found themselves in a corner, desperate to contain the damage to their international reputation. They needed a solution that would satisfy the public demand for retribution, while respecting the fragile legal frameworks they were attempting to install in a defeated, occupied Germany. The solution was a masterpiece of legal gymnastics, a calculated maneuver to bypass the very rules of justice that had initially set her free. Because the initial trial at Dachau had focused exclusively on war crimes committed against Allied nationals, it had conveniently left a massive, untapped reservoir of unaddressed atrocities, the crimes Koch had committed against German and Austrian citizens. By utilizing this clever jurisdictional distinction, American and West German authorities were able to navigate around the strict, ironclad prohibitions against double jeopardy under Allied Control Council Law No. 10. They were essentially creating a separate, parallel track of justice, ensuring that while the American military could wash its hands of the controversy, the state of West Germany would finish the job. The moment Ilse Koch stepped out of U.S. custody in 1949, she was not walking toward freedom, but straight into the arms of waiting West German police, who were waiting to arrest her before she even left the prison gates. The second act of this drama unfolded in Augsburg between November 1950 and January 1951. This was a trial of a vastly different character, predicated not on the sensationalist, headline-grabbing skin legends of the American media, but on a mountain of de novo witness testimony that was far more difficult to dismiss. Dozens of former inmates took the stand, detailing not the macabre trophies, but the raw physical reality of her sadism. The systematic beatings, the incitement to murder, and the chilling cruelty she had inflicted upon her own countrymen. The court heard consistent first-hand accounts of a woman who had used the absolute authority of her position to break the bodies of those she deemed inferior. On January 15, 1951, the Augsburg court delivered a verdict that matched the severity of her crimes, sentencing her to life imprisonment and hard labor. For Koch, this was the final, crushing blow, effectively closing the door on the life she had once known. She spent the following years locked in a futile cycle of appeals, consistently maintaining that she was a victim of political convenience. She argued that the judiciary was not interested in justice, but in satisfying public rage and sanitizing the tarnished reputation of the post-war German legal system. She portrayed herself as a political scapegoat, sacrificed at the altar of public opinion to provide a semblance of moral closure for a nation still grappling with the ghosts of its recent past. Whether or not she was a political pawn, the reality of her life had become a grim, stark testament to the complexities of post-war accountability. She had been tried, convicted, released, and imprisoned again, moving from the theater of international military justice into the more intimate, yet equally punitive arena of the West German court, a cycle that underscored the frantic, often messy, post-war scramble to define what justice actually meant in the shadow of total annihilation. Final years and end of life. The final chapter of Ilse Koch's life was played out within the gray, sterile walls of the Eichach Women's Prison in Bavaria. After the turbulence of her trials, the public outcry, and the legal maneuvering, she vanished into the machinery of the German penal system. Yet, the woman who had once stood as a titan of terror in the Buchenwald compound found that she could not escape the ghosts of her past. Her mental state began a slow, agonizing descent. She fell into a spiral of progressive delusions and intense paranoia. The woman who had once stalked the campgrounds on horseback now lived in terror of the very people she had helped to torment. She became convinced that the survivors of Buchenwald were plotting to break into her cell, not to bring her to justice, but to inflict upon her the same physical abuse and torture she had once so casually ordered. It was a psychological prison within a physical one, where the memory of her crimes became the architect of her own madness. While her mind fractured, her only tether to the outside world was her son, Uwe. Placed in a foster home immediately after his birth at Landsberg, Uwe lived the early years of his life in total ignorance of his mother's infamy. He saw the name on his birth certificate at age 8, but it meant nothing to him. The devastating truth did not arrive until he was 19 years old, when a newspaper headline shattered his understanding of his own existence. He discovered that his mother was not merely absent, she was a monster in the eyes of history. Despite this, or perhaps because of it, he initiated contact. He visited her for the first time in 1966, a year before her death, and continued these visits throughout her final months. It is difficult to fathom the nature of their conversations. A son reckoning with a legacy of absolute evil, and a mother trapped in a cage of her own making, struggling to maintain the remnants of her identity. On September 1st, 1967, at the age of 60, the long, grueling confinement finally reached its terminus. Ilse Koch took her own life, using a bedsheet to hang herself in her prison cell. Administrative records would later mark the event on September 2nd, but the act of finality had already occurred. Before the end, she wrote a final note to her son, characterizing her death as a long-awaited release. For a woman who had once held absolute power over the life and death of thousands, the only agency she had left was the choice to end her own suffering. She viewed her demise as an escape from a state of mental and physical torment that had become unbearable. The death of Ilse Koch was the final period on a chapter of post-war history that defied simple categorization. Her case remains one of the most compelling and uncomfortable studies for historians, primarily because of the way the world forced her into the mold of a caricature. By fixating on the gore, the sex, and the labels, like the bitch of Buchenwald, the global public created a monster that was easy to hate. This was a psychological defense mechanism. It allowed society to distance itself from the more uncomfortable, systemic reality of the Holocaust. It is far more comforting to believe that the Holocaust was directed by a collection of sadistic perverts and moral aberrations than to acknowledge the truth, that it was operated by bureaucrats, ordinary citizens, and people who, like Ilse Koch, found ways to rationalize the industrial destruction of human life. The Ilse Koch phenomenon serves as a warning about the intersection of gender and power. Her violation of the traditional norms of womanly behavior made her an easy target for a world eager to externalize its own guilt. By focusing so intensely on her as a Gothic figure of malice, we have often obscured the broader, bureaucratized nature of the Nazi regime. She was, in many ways, the perfect villain, but she was also a product of a system that demanded the very cruelty she displayed. She reminds us that the machinery of evil does not always operate through the distant, cold, and calculated actions of men in suits. Sometimes it operates through the people living in the villa on the camp perimeter, those who normalize the unthinkable as part of their daily routine. The story of Ilse Koch is not just the story of a woman who lost her mind in a prison cell. It is a mirror reflecting the unsettling ease with which ordinary individuals can become the gears of a machine designed to erase humanity.